So thank you everyone for joining us. If this is your first time, then I can assure you that usually things go a little bit more smoothly and we aren't waiting too long at the start. However, what I'm going to do to make up for the lost time here is we're going to skip the intros today. So usually we give everyone an opportunity to say hello and introduce themselves or bring up a question they might have. But I think what we'll do is we'll just move through that and go straight to the homework, see if anyone has any questions or interesting answers there. And then I really want to get and have enough time to talk about super soil or living soil, because it is such an important topic. I think it's really key that all growers understand the difference between a living soil and a sterile or a traditional potting soil. And then, of course, we'll talk about next steps and where we're going from there. And if you do have any questions, please put those in the chat. My facilitator, Kat, will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to have some time at the end as well for that. So with that in mind, we'll go through the intros and we'll make sure we have time next week for those. And I want to do a quick recap. I know we have some new folks joining us, which is awesome. And the really key thing to appreciate for this meeting is around this idea of regenerative growing. And you don't need to know all the details, but we do want to understand at a high level what that really means. And in this case, regenerative growing is about improving the ecosystem with every season, with every year. So unlike traditional commercial or conventional agriculture, which in fact is incredibly damaging and degrading, and year in, year out, that ecosystem is worse and worse off. The nice thing about regenerative growing and applying regenerative principles is that it allows the quality of that ecosystem, the synergies between the different organisms, and ultimately the output or the yield to increase year over year over year. So you can appreciate as a grower why that would be really beneficial, because it means that the work or the inputs, the effort that you contribute this season are in fact gonna benefit you for a long time to come. And in order to achieve this, regenerative growing has 6 principles, and you can see them listed here. And so, minimizing soil disturbance, we don't want to be digging in our soil unless we absolutely have to. And that is because when we dig in our soil, we're exposing the microbial life, that biology, to conditions that they really aren't comfortable with. And as a consequence, we're doing more harm than damage, more harm than benefit. In terms of maximizing diversity, this one is a really overarching principle and applies to all facets of regenerative growing, in terms of whether it's the diversity of plants that you're growing, the diversity of inputs, the diversity of mulch that you're using. It's really about every shape and form. We're increasing diversity, which again is what Mother Nature would be doing naturally in an untouched ecosystem. We want to protect our soil surfaces, so we always want our soil to be covered, ideally with plants. That's the best option, but there are alternatives in terms of mulch or tarping. And really the key piece here is we really don't want bare soil that's going to be exposed to the environment. Again, the environmental conditions are damaging both to the soil itself and then to the microbial life that's living in that soil. We want to keep living roots in the ground. So this is really key to the idea that plants and microbes in the soil are in a synergistic relationship, and we're going to talk a bit more about that today. And that the plants release a carbon sugar, a carbohydrate through their roots, and that is what feeds the microbes. So when you don't have living roots in the ground, if, for example, you only grow annual plants that die when the frost hits, that's going to be problematic for the quality of your soil because there's nothing to feed those microbes through the winter months. Of course, we really want to stay away from chemicals as much as possible. And I am going to be speaking more specifically to chemicals today because it is really pertinent to this discussion around the value of living soil. And last but not least is, again, when we look at natural ecosystems, untouched ecosystems, animals play a really, really important role. And part of that is about constantly renewing the diversity in an ecosystem. And that how they do that is really critical to overall success. Of course, given that a lot of us are urban growers, we don't necessarily have the ability to bring in some roaming buffalo, for example. So we can turn to compost as an alternative, and often that compost is ultimately being produced through or from some level of animal products. So really what regenerative growing does is it looks after the biology in soil, which ultimately will look after the plants and the ecosystem as a whole. So last week we had some homework that folks were going to work on. So I do want to give an opportunity for a few folks to be able to speak to that. So if someone would like to contribute their homework, Pat, I am having some problems with seeing the hands up. So maybe you can facilitate one or two folks. So if you would like to contribute your responses from last week's homework, please put your hand up using the emoji at the bottom, and Kat is going to call on you to share your answers.
So we have Wally.
Sorry, I just had to find my microphone. I'm kind of borrowing some of the stuff we talked about last week, but cover crops is to me one of the regenerative principles. Compost layering on top of the soil, and again, what we talked about last week was leave the roots in the ground from last year's. In other words, the chop and drop principle would be
great.
three regenerative principles and three applicable ways to protect the soil. So in the fall, we'll lay down leaves, hay, wood chips, like you were saying, mulch. Also, there's the option of covering with the tarp, which has pros and cons. And then again, back to the chop and drop. So in the fall, what I've done in the past, Jocelyn, is I've taken all the vegetables, like the tomato plants, and I've just chopped them and just laid them on top of the soil and left them in there over the winter. And those are my ideas.
Awesome. I was going to ask for your for a specific suggestion because I can certainly tell you're taking excellent notes. And but I love that you were able to give us a concrete demonstration of how you're already applying that. So that's great. Thanks for kicking us off there, Wally.
You're welcome.
And then we have Sally.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. So for the regenerative principles, a couple of these things I've actually started doing in my garden already. So when I plant my veggie garden, I don't plant in rows. I tend to plant, sort of mix things around. So to keep the bugs down as well as to attract pollinating insects. So I'll incorporate like zinnias and marigolds, like something to repel. And I would put like basil between tomatoes. I try to do some of that. For the first time this year, I've actually tarped my raised bed to keep it covered. So I've already done that, and in the process, I'll be keeping all the living roots in place. So those are some of the things I've done. I actually don't use fertilizers. I do use compost, and I try to do earthworm castings together with sea compost. So I get like an animal compost as well as a plant compost. That's what I've done. And like I said, I've covered the soil this year. I've tarped it, but next year, my questions last week about the peas and oats, I'll definitely be trying that this year to have more of a living mulch instead of the tarp. So those are some of the things that I've done and I'm planning to do.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then yeah, that was a great question last week about the living mulch and the oats and peas kit that we offer. I think there's been a bunch of hands going up, which is great, but I think we'd probably only have time for one more. So Kat, can you call one more, please?
Sure, we have Annette as well.
Hello. Quick question. As I heard Sally spoke, in the past I've covered my lot, but I've heard that there might be some benefit, especially over the winter, in leaving the plot uncovered to get, I don't know, maybe nutrients or whatever from the snow and things like that. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, great question. So when you say you covered your plot, what were you using to cover?
Tarp.
A tarp. Okay.
Mhm.
So there is some legitimacy to this challenge, and that is that, you know, finding the right thing to cover our soil with through the winter can be challenging. So a tarp is certainly effective in terms of it's easy. It's going to work really well. You know, you don't have to worry. You can use it year in, year after year. Generally, we would say a tarp is better suited as a temporary mulch or a short-term cover rather than a longer-term cover through the winter. And there is a few reasons for that. So the first is that in the winter, when we have snow on our beds or on our soil, there is an interface between where the soil and the snow hit each other or connect. And what happens right there is there's a film of water that's created. And this is actually really, really important and effective because I know you've been a few other sessions in that. So microbes live in water. They live in the water film interface that exists in healthy soil. That's why we need our soil to always have a certain level of moisture. So you can imagine in winter that when there is constantly a film of water at the top of the soil where it meets the snow, that in fact is a really effective way to have your microbes working through the winter, especially at the top layer of your soil, where during the summer, they aren't as keen to exist because that's where it dries out first. So there is benefit to not covering your soil with a plastic tarp, because that's going to prevent that interface. Whereas a natural mulch like a wood chip or a straw, as Wally mentioned, is going to allow for more of that microbial interaction with the moisture generated from the snow. So, you know, you're certainly not going to be in bad standing for the spring, but it would be something to consider for next winter.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so let's keep moving here because I'm keeping an eye on the time. And I want to talk about this idea of super soil or a living soil. And if you've been here for a few weeks now, you'll appreciate that I keep coming back to this idea of how plants and soil microbes interact and in fact are interdependent on each other for the successful growth of both those populations. And really what it comes down to is this, as I mentioned, that plants release carbohydrate sugars into the soil that is called exudates, and that this is in fact a very specific language that plants and soil microbes have developed over millions of years, and that what it allows is for the plant to put in a specific request for a type of nutrient that it needs. So plants, just like you and I, have a sense when we haven't been eating enough healthy food, for example, and we know we need to get more fiber into our system. So plants are very much able to identify what nutrients they're missing, what nutrients they need next for the next stage of their growth cycle, or perhaps what special molecules they require to fight off a pathogen or improve the overall quality of the fruit that they're producing. And so it's the biology in the soil that interprets this request. They understand the language, and they go out much further than the plant's root systems could ever reach on their own. They find those nutrients. Often they are able to access them through natural metabolic processes that involve enzymes. They're like a sticky glue or liquid juice that they can release. And then they bring that nutrient back to the plant, they hand it over, and they get some more sugar, which makes it a transformative relationship, in fact, because both of those individuals, the plant can now grow bigger, it can perform more photosynthesis, which ultimately is going to produce more carbohydrates to feed the microbes. And as well, the microbes in the soil that are receiving the sugar are able to divide and multiply and grow their populations as well. So this is really key to understanding where we're going next, and this idea that biology is providing both ongoing and on-demand nourishment or nutrients. And the on-demand piece is what I just spoke of, this idea that a plant can sort of call up the pizza delivery microbe and ask for whatever pizza they want, and it gets delivered, and in exchange the pizza delivery microbe gets a carbohydrate tip from the plant. This idea of ongoing is very similar and related, but it's important to appreciate that the grandmother of regenerative growing, Dr. Elaine Ingham, has said that nowhere in the world is there soil that is missing nutrients. There's no soil that is short on the nutrients that plants require to be healthy and strong and produce huge yields. The only thing that is missing is the biology that is required to act as the middleman or the middle person between the nutrients and the plant itself. And this is really critical because the big soil companies have, I would argue, probably purposefully misled the public into thinking that soil runs out of nutrients. Let's be clear, that is impossible, right? Clay, sand, loam, they all are chock full of the micro and macronutrients that plants need. There's no shortage. It's the shortage of biology that it causes the issue. So as long as your biology is there, ready and waiting, and a diversity of biology, so whichever, the microbes have a very niche role often that they play. They can only really respond to a certain request, and therefore you do need that wide diversity of microbes so that whatever request comes in, the right type of microbe, even if there's only one or two, is needed to be laying dormant, and it will wake up, it'll respond, it'll grow its population quickly, and then deliver to the plant. So from an ongoing perspective, the biology can feed the plant essentially endlessly and on demand. So to really appreciate why that's so critical, we have to look at conventional soil or conventional potting soil. So, the best worst example is probably your Miracle-Gro potting soil that is essentially dead dirt. So what most potting soil is made of is three main components. So the first is likely a low-grade purchased compost. The second is likely a peat moss product, and then usually there's a third perlite or vermiculite, which helps to hold water and also provides aeration or a level of structure and porosity. And so the first component is compost, which off the top you might think, well, isn't that a good thing, right? Don't we like compost? And this is where it's important to appreciate the different types of compost and ultimately how they're made. So believe it or not, Scott's Miracle-Gro is the largest purchaser of compost in the country. They buy way more compost than anybody else, and then they use it as one of the main inputs for the soils they sell. The problem with this is that the compost they're buying is compost that's gone through a thermophilic process or a sterilization process. And the reason that it's gone through this is because whoever's making that compost wants to remove any potential pathogens that could exist in that end product. So for example, if there is any manure that is going into a compost product, then it's going to be really high in E. coli, for example, and they need to be an absolute 100% sure that there's going to be zero E. coli in that finished product. So what they do is they jack up the heat to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and they let that material cook for a number of days or even weeks. And in doing so, they can create a finished product that they feel comfortable and confident has no E. coli, no pathogens. But ultimately, the reason they're comfortable doing that or confident committing to that is because it has no biology whatsoever. The thermophilic, this high heat process, cannot discriminate between the good biology and the bad biology, or the healthy soil microbes that are supposed to be there and the pathogenic soil microbes, which ultimately are also supposed to be there, but in very small quantities. And so that's another thing to appreciate. We've sort of been tricked into thinking that a healthy soil is only going to be filled with the really good microbes, the healthy soil beneficial microbes. But the reality is all microbes have a role to play. They all have an ability to benefit the soil in one way or another, but it's in a very particular scenario or response. And so if we appreciate soil from a more holistic point of view, we also appreciate that we do need a few small numbers of pathogenic soil microbes, the bad microbes, because they serve a purpose. So for example, perhaps there is a plant that is dying for another reason. These pathogenic microbes are going to help decompose that plant and return those nutrients back into the soil so the other plants can be healthy. So Miracle-Gro is putting this sanitized, sterile, basically dead dirt compost into their soil. And as a result, they also have to jack it full of man-made chemicals. So if you were here last time, you'll appreciate that these are the chemicals that were developed during World War II, thanks to the Haber-Bosch process, where we're making man-made nitrogen, and that it's in a soluble format. So this is important because plants can only absorb nutrients when it is in a soluble format. And it's part of what the micro magic. They're able to take insoluble nutrients and convert them to the soluble format, which is the bioavailable or the plant available format, and the plants can then absorb them quickly. With chemical fertilizers, because there is no biology, chemicals and biology are antagonistic. They can't exist together because the chemicals are toxic. No question there, right? So if you're going to have these man-made chemical soluble fertilizers in your soil, you're not going to have any biology. And the upside to this, at least from the Scott's Miracle Grow's perspective, is that when you first use that potting soil, your plants have lots of access to lots of different soluble nutrients, or at least some soluble nutrients. So they're ready to go, they can absorb them really quickly, and they can grow really quickly and fast and big and green. And as a consumer, when we see that in the first week or two, we're like, oh, this is great, what an excellent soil. What Miracle Grow doesn't tell you, what Scott's Miracle Grow doesn't tell you, is that because those nutrients are in a soluble format, as soon as you start watering your plant or your potting soil, those nutrients are getting lost, and they're effectively being drained out of the bottom of your potted plant. And personally, I would suggest, hopefully nobody works for Scott's Miracle Grow, but I would suggest that this, in fact, is part of their scheme, and that they've sort of pulled the wool over the public's eyes, that you're paying money for toxic chemicals that are going to give a quick hit to your plant, but then immediately start draining and being lost as either if it rains or when you first water your plant. So the result is that very quickly that potting soil has no nutrients remaining whatsoever. And what do you have to do? Well, of course, you have to go buy some Scott's Miracle Grow fertilizer, right? It's a pretty beautiful business model. I mean, you can't argue that part. They've got the public hook, line, and sinker, and ultimately you're paying up front for chemicals that go down the drain, so that then you can pay for more chemicals, which then have to require more chemicals because there's no biology, and it's ridiculous. Additionally, because these chemicals are in a soluble format, it can burn the roots of the plant. In nature, most of the nutrients are not available, ready and waiting in a soluble format, right? They need the biology, and that's actually important, because when they are soluble, the plant takes up too much, and you can burn your roots or seedlings, which really need a gentle dosed amount of nutrients, are just wiped out. And that's why they're then able to sell a special seed starting potting soil mix as well. So in terms of what else is in a traditional potting soil, usually you're looking at peat moss, especially here in Canada. And that's because second to Russia, we have more peat bogs than any other country in the world. And in fact, peat bogs are incredibly important ecosystems. And for a variety of reasons, there's a whole bunch of, so for those that are unfamiliar to peat bogs, what they are is they're ancient lakes or ponds that over time organic material like dead animals, dead plants have built up, but without the access to oxygen that would be required for regular decomposition. And so what's created is basically like a swampland full of organic matter that holds massive amounts of water. And it's also a very unique ecosystem because it's like half land, half water. So the diversity, the biodiversity is incredible in these specific ecosystems because it's unlike any other type of ecosystem. And they play a really important role in flood mitigation. So when there's a lot of rain, they're able to soak a lot of that up. And then when there isn't enough rain, they are actually able to drain out and provide the surrounding. But the biggest reason why we absolutely must stop harvesting peat. So what happens, peat is harvested like the other raw elements that we extract from the earth. Basically, they strip any plants or trees that might be around there. They bring in the bulldozers, they bring in the heavy equipment, and then they just like rape the land of all that peat. And you can see in that photo what that ends up looking like. And the reason they do this is it's incredibly inexpensive. And they are able to gather massive amounts of this material that is useful for soil at ridiculously inexpensive costs. And the thing about peat bogs, they like to argue that they're regenerative, they're a natural ecosystem, they're only taking a little bit relative to how much we have. That's bullshit. It's total bullshit. Yes, it is a natural ecosystem and it does regenerate. The timeline we're looking for peat bog regeneration is in the hundreds of thousands of years. So, and when they claim, well, they're only taking a small percentage. Well, again, we have more peat bogs in Canada. Most of them are terribly inaccessible because they're in our northern climates. But don't believe this piece about peat being renewable or regenerative. It's not. Once they're gone, it's gone for good. And the thing is that peat, because it's full of organic material, holds massive amounts of carbon dioxide, which is like one of our biggest challenges right now when it comes to climate change, right? And so it's kind of, it's doubly as bad when it comes to climate change or the climate crisis, because not only triply bad, because it's very resource intensive. So they got to burn a bunch of diesel for the heavy equipment to pull it out. When they rip it out of the ground, they're essentially adding all that carbon that was stored into the atmospheric carbon cycle. So this is important to understand, right? The reason why we can sequester carbon in peat or in soil itself is because it gets locked in the ground and it gets removed from our atmospheric carbon cycle. So that's sort of like a tree. A tree already has carbon, and when it dies, it's going to release that carbon into the atmosphere, which hopefully then is going to be used for photosynthesis, and it's existing atmospheric carbon. It's already part of our carbon load. The carbon that is in peat bogs or sequestered in healthy soil has been removed from our atmospheric carbon load and is effectively locked there forever until we as humans do something stupid like this, which is then release it back into the atmosphere. So, we're burning fossil fuels, we're releasing all this new extra carbon into the atmosphere, and we're preventing future ability to allow that peat bog to store more carbon. Because like once the peat bog's gone, it's gone for good. Again, we don't have 100,000 years to let it recover. Coconut coir has been developed as an alternative. Both of these substrates are really absorptive, and that's ultimately why they're used. You can understand a peat bog, sort of like, okay, it holds a lot of water. Same with coconut coir. The problem there is the carbon footprint from transportation is significantly high. The other problem, which we don't necessarily consider, is that is organic material, that is nutrients that we are stealing ultimately from third world countries. The quality of their soil is going to be significantly damaged by our desire to grow some pretty tomatoes in a potting soil at an inexpensive price. And I do think that that's an important point to mention. So here's what happens when you grow with soil microbes. You see the difference that, now in this case, it's the worm manure itself, which we know from past sessions is full of that microbial life. But I wanted to show this picture to really understand the impact that has. So on the left, it would be like your traditional Miracle-Gro potting soil if you didn't continue to add fertilizers all season long. Whereas on the right, you have a regenerative potting soil full of biology that is able to provide the on-demand nutrition and is able to feed your plant all season long. If you were here at other sessions, you'll already understand that microbes are directly responsible for so many factors related to soil health. So they create that nice structure that allows for air and water, which is really pivotal for healthy root development. They are directly responsible for influencing chemical factors in the soil like pH and adapting that based on the needs of the plants. They are responsible for creating that humus layer, which is that thick, rich layer of high carbon, high nutrient soil that we love to see, that dark, beautiful soil that smells so good. We all love in our garden. And okay, this part's really cool because so they've also recently discovered that microbes in the soil do something called quorum sensing. And we don't really understand that much yet about how it works. But what we know now is that microbes are able to assess how many other microbes are around them, are in that soil, in that ecosystem, and the diversity of the other microbes that are in that ecosystem. And there's some kind of a threshold or tipping point when the diversity and the number is so strong that they're able to synergize and create a new product that they would never have been able to create on their own. And our understanding is just coming along on this, but basically what we're beginning to appreciate is that these microbes, not only are they working with the plant, but they're actually working with each other. And when they realize that there is a strong, diverse community that surrounds them, they level up. They take on a bigger challenge. They're able to produce some new product that they weren't able to produce if they hadn't sensed this idea of a quorum. So again, just another really cool thing, and speaks this idea that the science behind soil biology is developing very, very quickly. So homework for those of you that are keen is going to be the following. So at a high level, what can you do to bring more microbes to your soil? I want you to consider what one of your growing challenges or issues or pest problems have been in the past, and how might microbes be able to solve this for you rather than you trying to solve it yourself. So, one way to answer that question would be, well, in nature, in a natural ecosystem, why wouldn't this be a problem? What mechanism does Mother Nature have in place to prevent this, and how maybe can I replicate that on my own balcony or in my garden? And then I'd like you to wonder or consider if there are particular areas in your growing space that are particularly dead. So have there been places where you have used chemicals in the past, or where you've really allowed the soil to be bare for much too long? Consider if there are particular areas that need extra remediation, and we can talk about how that might work next time. So I know we're gonna have time for questions, and but I know some people got to run, so I wanted to make sure you saw the. So this is our raw regenerative potting soil. So I'm very, very proud of this product. It is the first of its kind in Canada. Now, I forgot to mention, so peat, we were talking about peat and how terrible it is to be stripping it, mining it from our peat bogs. Well, Europe is way ahead of us on this piece. And in fact, they have been working on and bringing in legislation, and I believe it's this year it finally is fully in effect, that peat can no longer be used as a soil substrate or be incorporated into soil products for consumer horticultural purposes. So Europe and the UK have identified, now that they've basically stripped all their peat lands, so they have other problems, but they have identified that peat absolutely should not be used in soil. And they put in regulations and legislations to ensure that. So they have a lot more living soils in the market already because of this top-down regulatory approach. We don't really have many living soils in the market at all, and ours is the first in Canada to be both a living soil full of biology and peat-free. So for me, when I was making and developing, and it's been about 3.5 years since we started R&D on this project, and it was really, really critical that it was a living soil. So there was no toxic chemicals. It needed to be full of that biology that would feed your plants on demand and ongoing. And it had to be peat free. I was not going to stand for a soil that had peat in it. The good news was that as a worm farmer, we produce a large amount of byproduct when we harvest our worm manure, and it's generally a fairly woody material. And what we've been able to do is use that in place of peat. So we're able to do some upgrading on our end and turn that material, which was effectively in the worm bins, full of the biology from the worms, because remember, it's in the worm's gut, but also all over the worms as well as that beautiful biology. And we've been able to turn that byproduct from our worm manure harvesting into a core substrate that goes into this potting soil and replaces the need for peat. And so it's really incredible. And we've done the trials ourselves. We ran a really successful Kickstarter for this product last year and raised about $18,000. So we're shipping out the potting soil next week for all those Kickstarter folks if you're around. And then we've also run trials. So Kat can give the link to the Kickstarter, which is probably the best place if you really want to read all the science behind what we've done here. But the thing to understand is that there is a way to measure in the soil how many nutrients are ready and waiting for plants to access. It's called electrical conductivity, EC, or CEC. And what we were able to show in our trials, we trialed growing tomatoes in our raw regenerative potting soil against growing tomatoes in an organic Miracle-Gro potting soil. So they were both organic. I didn't want to tip the scales in our favor by using a chemical fertilizer based Miracle-Gro. So we chose the organic option. And what happened was the Miracle-Gro showed early on very high levels of soluble nutrients, and then it dropped off a cliff. So by the end of the first 4 weeks, there were practically no more nutrient availability for those plants. And then the results were those plants effectively started to brown and die out over the course of the trial. Our soil, while it started at a slightly lower level in terms of accessible nutrients, the decline over the growing period was very gradual. It was a very low slope, gentle slope, which meant that plant had access to nutrients through the whole growing season. And it was a direct result of the biology. They were the ones making those nutrients available. So this product's incredible. We're finally bringing it to retail shelves this spring. So if you live near like the Big Carrot or Ambrosia Natural Foods, you're going to be seeing this. But definitely you can get the best price by taking advantage of today's promo. On the small bag, you can save $5. On the medium 10-liter bag, you can save 10, and then on the 20-liter bag, you can save 20. And I'll be the first to admit that this is going to be the most expensive potting soil you probably ever buy. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, the reality is we're still making it in relatively small quantities, so there's a bit of a premium. But you have to remember that this product takes the guesswork out of growing. And instead of trying to figure out week in, week out, what's missing, what does your plant need, what kind of fertilizer, you don't have to worry about it. The Mother Nature is going to do that for you. And, you're not going to be buying fertilizers every month and spending a premium there. So you do pay a little bit more up front, and then you reap the benefits of that through your growing season as well. Okay, so you've got your homework. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, make sure you do that. Kat will throw the link in the chat, or you can go to soilbooster.ca. Next week, we're looking at seed starting, yay! And I should mention that our raw and regenerative potting soil is excellent for seed starting. Who knew? The reason is, of course, we don't have those soluble chemicals, toxic chemicals. So so the potting soil is good from start to finish. You can germinate your seeds, you can pot up your seedlings, you can grow out your healthy yield, and you're going to be feeding your plant the right way all season long, right? That plant's going to ask for what it needs when it needs it, and it's not going to get anything extra that could be harmful. So we're going to be talking about seed starting next week. If you have questions, please reach out. And why don't we turn it over to the Q&A? So let me see if I stop sharing. I should be able. So if folks have a Q&A, why don't you throw your, or maybe I'll turn it over to you, Kat, because I'm seeing the chat's been pretty busy. Kat, you're still there? Your mute's on. Did you get tired of hearing about microbes? Okay, no.
Hi, sorry, forgot to press unmute. So we have two questions from Jane. What's the best grass for clay drought area? And then number 2 is overseeding weeded lawn with grass seeds. Will it crowd out weeds?
Okay, so we've got some questions about lawn care here. You know, I'll preface it by saying I am not a lawn care expert. So certainly, you know, we can do a whole session on lawn care. Maybe we should, Kat, if you want to make a note of that. So grass is actually pretty bad option for your lawn. It's hard to grow. It's very, it requires a lot of water. And ultimately the grass that we like is non-native. So a much better option for your lawn is actually clover. And we're seeing a lot more of this in the regenerative space, where people are transitioning their lawns to clover. And it's a much, much, much easier solution. And it provides very similar benefits. It's got that same lovely soft feel on your feet, your bare feet. But it is way easier to look after. It's not an invasive species. It sequesters a lot of carbon, so you can actually store carbon in your lawn. It doesn't require regular mowing, so you're not using fossil fuels. Clover is the way to go if you're struggling with lawn care. So, and it won't end up being patchy, and you won't have to worry about weeds. Clover is a ground cover, and it outcompetes a lot of the other potential plants that might want to come up. So, you know, the answer to both those questions, Jane, would be to switch your lawn over to clover. And Kat, so Kat, can you eat clover? Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, you can definitely eat there's certain types of clover. There's white clover and red clover, and some of them are extremely nutritious and pretty delicious too.
And it's food for the birds and the bees.
Yes.
That's a great, thank you. Who said that? Who said food for the who said food for the bees and the pollinators?
It's very cool. Thank you for the info. I'm gonna pass it on. I live up in a upper middle class neighborhood. They might not approve of that, but I'm gonna pass on the information anyway.
There's also native grasses. If you really want to do a grass, there's like little blue stem is great, drought tolerant. There's a few other ones that are native grasses that are also drought tolerant, so you can look into those as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And I should mention I'm so lucky to have Kat. Not only does she do a fabulous job backing me up here on moderating, but Kat is actually a trained community herbalist. She's incredibly passionate about plants, about regenerating with natural species. And you can see that passion shine through whenever she speaks. So thanks for backing me up there, Kat.
You're welcome.
Who should we call on next?
So we also had a question in the chat. What about mushroom compost? Is that a good option or alternative?
So mushroom compost is an interesting option. I wouldn't want to use it all as my only input. And that really goes for anything, you know, maybe worm manures. But other than worm manure, you know, you want a diversity, so you wouldn't want to use only the downside to mushroom compost is that a lot of the nutrients have in fact already been used. And that's because the name mushroom compost is a little bit deceptive. It's not technically a compost, it's a used substrate, or it's a compost that has already been used to grow mushrooms. And so what that means is that a lot of the nutrients have in fact already been used for the mushrooms themselves. So it is a source of carbon, and this goes back to this question of traditional compost that you buy in the big bags for inexpensive is a high carbon input, which is important. We want to be putting carbon back into our soils, but it doesn't necessarily have that microbial diversity. And again, that's because it's been specifically formulated and in fact utilized to grow one or perhaps a few specific type of fungi mushrooms. So it isn't as diverse as we like to think it is, but it's certainly not bad. So you know, use it, but make sure you're using other things as well.
All right, then we have another question. Let's see, I've already answered a few of them in the chat. Oh, there's no way I can replace all the current soil I have in my raised bed, so I'm assuming we're going to go over exactly how to start to make it better. Need a plan to do this.
Okay, that was a great. Who was that, Kat?
Wendy.
Wendy. Okay, Wendy. Thank you, Wendy. Definitely, yeah. There's no way, and nor would you want to replace all the soil in your raised bed unless you found out it had heavy metals or plastic contamination. But let's assume that's not the case. So there are lots of other options. Probably, if we're talking a lot of raised beds, my recommendation is going to be to use a super concentrated biological amendment, which is the worm manure. And that's because a little goes a long way. You can really cover a lot of square footage with a broadcast application, and it's going to bring all that microbial goodness to that existing soil where it can immediately go to work. Of course, don't forget, when we add our microbes, we also want to be getting living roots into the ground at the same time. We add our microbes and then wait a number of weeks, then a lot of those microbes are going to go dormant, or they could potentially even die if they're rehydrated but don't have their plant partner ready and waiting to work with them. The other alternative, if we're looking at a smaller amount of, let's say, container growing, is that you can incorporate our raw regenerative potting soil to revive the dead dirt. So what you would be able to do, and we do often suggest this if you have a lot of space or volume that you have to cover, is that you can always mix our raw regenerative potting soil with a lower quality potting soil, so long as it doesn't have chemicals in it, and really stretch the value of the raw regenerative. So that point, you're potentially even looking at some other supplements, or you could be making your own potting soil, regenerative potting soil, using worm manure and perlite and other inputs if you make your own compost, for example. So there are a few other options, but generally what we say is that if you have a lot of space to cover, the worm manure is going to be your best bang for your buck because it's super concentrated and has that full spectrum of diverse microbial microbes. The potting soil is an excellent solution if you want to be one and done, or you're growing on a smaller scale. So let's say you go away every weekend in the summer, and you want a soil that's going to hold moisture, that's going to feed your plant. You got 2 weeks booked up north. You want it to last those 2 weeks. The potting soil is the solution if you're looking for a product, again, that's going to really make it super easy to have the biggest yield of your lifetime, let's say.
We also have Romana with a raised hand.
Hi, thanks.
Hi.
I have another meeting well, it started, but I'll wait because I was curious. This is my first time here, so thanks for the information. So I am planning to put in new raised beds. So I am trying to figure out then what's I mean, keeping cost in mind is not the only thing, but I can't
Of course.
completely ignore it too.
Yeah.
How to go about sort of filling it if we're not, I mean, I thought coconut coir was a good alternative, but since it's not, then sort of what are the good ways? So I guess maybe next week, maybe you'll be talking about that more.
Well, so next week we're talking about seed starting. So I think the quick and dirty answer to your question is that for most of the volume you need, you can buy a lower price, lower quality soil input. And even you could be buying a bunch of the horse manure bags from Home Depot that are a couple bucks. It's really going to be about making sure none of that has chemicals, so the toxins in it, but you can, like a bag of horse manure won't have chemicals in it. But it's about then supplementing with some biological amendments. So, for me, obviously worm manure is what we think is really important, but there are other types of biological amendments. So cricket frass, which is the poop from crickets. Again, it's a natural, it's organic, and it has particular microbial properties that are of benefit. So don't feel like you have to buy premium for all the soil that you need. It's really about, you can buy low cost and in bulk. Obviously, that would be the other piece, is look for, you can get soil delivered in like a cubic yard. And that would be the most cost-effective way to get that. And then you're simply supplementing with a more premium biological amendment, because remember, with the biologicals, it's not quantity, it's quality. And it's because you only need a few members of that particular group of microbes to be ready and waiting. And as soon as they're needed, the plant will feed those and the population will grow so they can do their job. So it's really unintuitive, because with chemical fertilizers, we've kind of been taught that, the more the merrier. We need to be adding, force feeding our plant. But the opposite is true with biologicals. It's not about giving them everything they need. It's about making sure those community partners, it's kind of like, so if you think of it like a town, for a town to work really well, you need your, police, fire, ambulance services, but then you also need your social workers, you need the hospital, you need your manufacturing businesses, you need your storefronts downtown, you need your mayor and your bureaucracy. Like, that is how soil works. And as long as you have one or two of each type, then whenever, there's a fire, the firefighters will come and they'll call in their backup from the other town. Or when you need new legislation, the policymakers are ready. And so that's sort of a way to conceptualize this idea of how to balance the inputs so that you're maximizing overall, but also minimizing your cost. And on that note, I love that you're new to the group. I love that you're getting new raised beds, and I think you're the perfect person to win our bag of worm manure giveaway for this session. So I think it was is it Romana?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Just before you head out to your next meeting, direct message Kat with your address. We'll get that sent out to you, and you'll be able to use that a little bit for your big garden bed, or for your houseplants, or however you want to end up using that. So thanks so much for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's we're almost at 10 after 2. Kat, were there any other really key questions?
So there's a quick question of what's the shelf life of worm manure, and then we have 2 more raised hands, Ginny and Sally.
Okay, so why don't we'll call it after those three. So the shelf life of the worm manure is up to a year. However, fresher is better. And the reason for that is that in order to make the product shelf stable, we do have to dehydrate it, which forces the microbes to go dormant. And so when you rehydrate or when you use it and then water your plants, those microbes come back to life. However, the longer that product stays in the bag, the efficacy of rehydrating does start to decrease. And that is further intensified if the worm manure is kept frozen. So one thing I say, if you have half a bag at the end in the fall, you want to keep it till the spring, keep it at room temperature. Don't keep it in the your unheated garage or outdoors, because it's challenging for the microbes when they have to come back. It's not that they won't, it's just that, again, the diversity. Some microbes are better equipped to handle our frost freeze cycles. So you're going to get the ones that are more resilient, whereas you won't get all of them that were in there when it was a fresher bag.
Okay, so we have Ginny.
Hi, Jocelyn, just wanted to share with the group my experience last year with your potting soil, and also bring up the point of people thinking about the regenerative effect. So once you invest in this, I want to make sure I've got this right. So I did some large pots with native plants. So that regenerative potting soil is in there. So the structure is there. This year, I only have to add a little bit of worm manure to go along, because the structure of that soil is there without the peat, but with the other things that you
wood
use.
Fibers, yeah.
So it's in terms of cost, because it does kind of make you go, what the heck? It's an investment for the future. So am I thinking correctly?
Definitely, yeah. So this idea that, buy it once, sort of use it forever, with the caveat that you do want to add a little bit of microbial diversity, like you said, a few handfuls of worm manure year after year. And that's because just naturally, in diversity is constantly being winnowed, because plants are selecting for the microbes that they like best at that particular moment. And so, if you're hopefully growing different plants in the container each year, you want to give it just a few extra handfuls, or maybe use it when you're starting your seeds, but someplace during the cycle at the beginning of the season, given that extra boost is going to make sure that anything maybe that got lost, will be repopulated.
And a little follow up on your story about the old farmer trick of looking at what you've already got. So for people that are doing new raised beds or looking for covers, even in a very urban environment, people are throwing out sticks and leaves, and you just go around on green bin day and you can put all that stuff in the bottom of your new raised bed, and then go with Cat's products as the icing on the cake. So please, 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 don't be ordering too much from Home Depot if you haven't looked at the end of people's driveways.
Thank you, Ginny. You know what? That is a great, and I have to give Ginny full credit. She's been such a great customer of ours for years now, and her whole sister got it on it. So, but this idea, we talked previously about what you can find on the curb, and I love my fellow dumpster divers. And but you know what, Kat, that is a great point we should have made to Romana, was that the bottom of your raised beds can in fact be filled with woody mulch and sticks and other materials. So when we send her that giveaway, let's just make a little note on the thank you that that's another option, because I'm sure she'll appreciate that.
Will do. So we just have Sally.
Oh, yes. So I have a quick question, because you can see mycorrhizal fungi is available for sale. What's your thoughts on adding that to your garden? is it worth it, or is it already existing in garden soil?
So the mycorrhizal is a special type of fungi that have an ability to work with the plant, and in fact, they can work inside of the plant to access unavailable nitrogen and turn it into the bioavailable format that nitrogen needs. And most plants can't do this for themselves, except for legumes, which can. So the general consensus is that there is lots of mycorrhizal everywhere in our atmospheres and in our ecosystems, in the soil, but also like floating around in the air, obviously we can't see them. And so if you are more or less in a natural environment, and haven't used chemicals, for example, that would kill them, you're probably okay not to buy them. You probably won't, you're not getting a lot of gain there. The only time that you might want to consider purchasing is if you are if you've used chemicals in the past and you're trying to quickly regenerate your soil and you want to sort of supercharge that process. The other time you might want to consider it is if you do live in an urban environment, because what we know about urban environments is there is significantly less microbial life, both in the soil, whether it was from, heavy metals or whatever industry maybe was there, leached from the gas station down the road. But that just generally there's fewer microorganisms floating through the air because our built environments don't encourage this, they don't allow for it. So if you're in the middle of a concrete jungle and you're growing in containers, not in the ground, then I would certainly consider looking at a myco product, and there might be some benefit, especially depending on what you're growing. So keep in mind that not all plants are going to want additional fungi being added to their soil. So there's some plants are early succession plants. So a lot of all the brassicas, your kale, your Brussels sprouts, your cauliflower, those things, they hate fungi. They don't want any fungi in their soil. They want only bacteria. And there's reasons I can explain why that is, but what's important to appreciate is you would definitely not want to put myco in with your kale and your brassicas, because you're going to be doing more harm than good.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you sticking around. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll have it smoothed out for next week, and look forward to talking seed starting then. Have a great week.
Thank you.